welcome to the next episode of the Deadliest Warrior podcast, the Persian Immortal versus the Celt. Gentlemen, I want to kick today's episode off. I'm going to read you the descriptions, and then I want to ask you what your memories are of this episode and what were your first impressions from your rewatch. On one side, represented by
Lucas,
we have the Persian Immortal, the precision killer in a massive war machine who forged the largest empire the Middle East has ever seen. Not true. Then, on Team Celt, we have
Craig Taylor
and
Brendan.
All right, the Celt, a savage war-loving barbarian from 400 BC who dominated Europe through brute force and raw fighting skill. Boys.
Wait, you didn't say doubt on that one.
Boys. Whatever order you want to go in. I know, Brendan, you have a particular bone to pick with this episode.
I want to say right out the gate.
Yeah.
This is Brendan's episode. I don't know if we talked about our process for picking who's on these episodes. Yeah. Basically, if you care about the episode, any of the non-traditionals, they'll get dibs and we'll bring them in the studio. This was Brendan's this is his episode. So he's definitely going to be the King Celt.
Yeah, there were two episodes when we started this whole project. Brendan was like, I need to be on the Viking episode and I need to be on the Celt episode. And so the wish has been granted, of course. So let's start with you, Brendan. What are your memories of this episode and your impressions of the rewatch?
It's gonna be like therapy.
Interesting enough, one of my first, what I first noticed when I watched this episode was how nice William Spencer Dineen's hair was.
Yes.
And before this, I did not have long hair. So this was one of the motivating factors, along with the hockey hair that Yammer Yager, Mark Ritchie. So William Spencer Dineen is up there with one of the people who inspired me to get the long hair.
Shout out.
Spencer Dineen, men's fashion icon.
Yeah, so while Jeff had a crush on Francis, you had a crush on William.
Yeah, he cool hair dude.
Yeah. All right, Craig, do you have any memories or first impressions of the rewatch here?
No.
Okay.
I'll say this. This is definitely the episode I've taken the least amount of notes on. We are working on another project, so some of my time was put in this other project, but nonetheless...
That'll probably be out before this episode.
Yeah, I was just thinking that it'll probably be out.
We'll see.
I was going to say stay tuned, but we'll see, yeah.
You may or may not know what project I'm talking about, but... this episode, I don't have a lot to say about it. So I'm kind of just here for the ride, supporting Brendan, probably not in any way that he needs. But
we literally, I want you guys to know, we assigned Craig to the Celt team because we were like, he's a Celt descendant because he has red hair. So that was it. Luke?
I remember this episode for what everyone remembers this episode for. Chariots, baby. Horse drawn.
Well, that's one thing I want to say. Maybe obvious to people like Brendan, people that really are into Celts. I did not realize that the Celts had access to chariots, which I thought was interesting. You see them, you think of them as very primitive, but it's something that surprised me because I was like, I saw them demonstrating it. I'm like, wait, why are the Celts on a chariot?
Obviously, season 2, they bring in horses, and the chariot is just another element of that. I will say this is one of those episodes of Deadliest Warrior that I watched when it premiered, and I hadn't watched it since then. But do not worry, in prep, I watched it 4 times in the last week just to get ready. And it was funny because I thought, I'm not going to have a lot of notes to write about this. And then I wrote way too many notes. I had to cut stuff out.
I'm on the boat with you.
I wrote for 2.5 hours, and it was midnight last night, and I was like, what the fuck? Why am I still thank God this episode's almost over.
Hey, at the end of the day, this is what I call the meat and potato episodes, where it's the classic ancient warrior one-on-one with the just, here's some weapons.
So that was going to be my impressions of the rewatch. I thought 2 things. Number 1 is that I guess they work together, the 2 things. It feels like a season 1 episode in a lot of ways, in that it is a back to the basics kind of episode, and it's also extremely chaotic. Like guys will just say shit and then they'll go and test it. And like you would think like, well, the chariot weapons will be tested against each other, but they're not. So it's like, what is getting used from a chariot? What's not? You know, it's all over the place, and they test like one thing against the armor. And it's just because somebody says it. And I mean this all in a good way. Like it reminded me of the sort of off the cuff chaos that was season 1. And I really liked it. The other thing I'll say in relating to season 1 is that this episode reminds me a lot of Viking vs. Samurai, which was the other one you were on, Brendan. In that the whole narrative through line is, here is a giant savage man fighting against a precise, disciplined warrior who's been trained from, his whole life. And I'm sure we'll get into that, but I noticed that was the setup for the whole episode.
Viking Samurai too. Shout out to that episode. That was pre-camera. That was before I even knew what we looked like.
Yep. That was you were on the episode, Brendan, too, and that was in Matt's parents' house.
Yeah. Yep. Filmed it
on the dinner table.
You can hear the doggos running around in the back.
I was about to say the Easter egg for the true heads. If you go back and listen to where you can hear my dog's collar like ching, 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 and I kind of crack up a little bit when it happens.
Right in the beginning of this episode too, I cannot get over how funny the Celt stand-ins look.
Oh,
it was like I said earlier, it's like a bad LARP, bad live action.
The
role
main
play.
Celt has to be Barry Jacobson's son. He looks exactly like him.
You think so?
Yeah, I'll put it side by side.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We have a fan we have a viewer that knows Barry Jacobson's son, doesn't he?
Yeah,
or
at
did
least
he just like me?
I don't know if he's frequent viewer.
If you're watching, whether it's a week from now or 3 years from now, let us know. Can you confirm?
I mean, I don't think it's the real Barry, but he has like a very, very similar face and like a full head of hair. So
you are right. The costumes are at an all-time.
Do you remember the one that has like the blonde, shorter length hair? I wrote he looks like a bad Avatar: The Last Airbender character.
He does, or like one of the extras in a Twilight movie. It's like extra blonde hair. Okay, so we can get right in. Well, let's talk about the stats. Persian Immortal stats: years 500 BC, 5'8", weight 160. The armor is bronze scale and a wicker shield. So, the Persian Empire we know existed for a period of time. The height and weight we've talked about multiple times on this show it just seems to be arbitrary. Like they just kind of make stuff up, and I think it's all for narrative, like a smaller guy fighting a bigger guy. And then the Celt stat, which I guess is you said was particularly helpful, Brendan, because they do give a year, and it's the year 400 BC, height of 6 foot and weight of 180 pounds. That I don't know if that many people were 6 feet tall back then, but and then the armor, they have armor of leather and a wooden shield. They don't mention their helmet in the beginning, but that adds to the chaos element of the episode, which I love. So I guess to start us off, the show gives us a bit of history about the Celts, claiming they are the ancestors of Scottish and Irish clans. The show also claims that the Celts mastered metalwork, ushered in the Iron Age, and used those weapons to conquer most of Europe, even sacking in early Rome. The Celts were split into many different clans, and Spencer claims that the Celts were known to fight naked and, quote, with a raging hard-on. Brendan, are the claims by the show true? And can you take a little bit of time, tell us what a Celt is, and maybe a little bit about their history?
Well, first of all, it's kind of true. The truth is always a bit more nuanced than the show puts it. But simply put, a Celt is anyone who speaks a Celtic language. It's a linguistic term. The word Celt having multiple origins, first used by the geographer Hecataeus of Miletus of Greek origin, and he used the term Keltoi, apparently meaning tall ones. But there's also two other
six feet tall.
Yeah. There's also two other Indo-European roots for Kel, meaning either the exalted, chosen ones, or the hidden ones, which may be in reference to the British Isles being hidden by the clouds overhead from the sun. But another name given to them are Gauls or Galati by the Romans and Greeks, apparently stemming from the ancient Proto-Germanic Valhaz, meaning foreigner. But from an archaeological standpoint, the Celts can be defined by their material culture, the earlier Hallstatt and the later La Tène. The Celts in the show are the La Tène Celts. Okay. And the origins of how these cultures came to be, or these material cultures came to be, is that in the late Neolithic period, we discovered that these big megalithic stone tombs and structures like, Stonehenge are usually found to be older along the coastal regions. And this suggests that the early Indo-European migrants used maritime travel to establish themselves on coastal regions and most likely had a series of trade. And when we know that this trade happened because of a phenomenon known as the bell beaker phenomenon, in which we have a distinctive form of pottery called a bell beaker that are found in these grave sites, but they're usually made from clays local to the area, suggesting that the idea and beliefs surrounding these pieces of pottery were shared, not the potteries themselves. And the Celtic language probably grew as a lingua franca,
because each region used what materials was available to them.
And in order to speak and relay these things, they used a lingua franca, or a bridge language, to help facilitate trade and interaction between these people who didn't share a common tongue. And interestingly, these are how the modern language of Malay and Swahili developed in the Malaysian Peninsula and the east coast of Africa.
Really?
So I'm going to skip the Hallstatt era because I could go on. But
you wrote it just for fun?
I actually timed this and I went over like 50 minutes going over all this.
I just watched Brendan scroll up like 6 pages.
So the La Tène Celts from around 450 BC, when they split off from the Hallstatt, are the quintessential Celts. They have these abundance of weapons and armors in their tombs that weren't in the Hallstatt. The Hallstatt tombs did not have weapons in their tombs. So this indicates that they became a much more warlike and martial society. And we also find large hordes of weapons found in lakes and bogs, that these were votive offerings to the gods. And these warrior nobles were definitely of greater importance than the common man. Society was rather stratified, with warriors and druids and blacksmiths would take place or take precedence.
So they had
over
like a hierarchy set up.
Yes.
Okay. And were they particularly good with metalwork? They seem to stress that a lot in this
Absolutely.
episode.
They did not bring forth the Iron Age. They acquired it through trade with the Hittites in Anatolia. But but a lot of their material culture influenced much of early Europe. One of these things are the hill forts, or oppidum, that dotted the landscape of the Celts, and they would be ruled over by a king or chief, and would have their other warrior aristocrats rule over surrounding villages called pagi. Interestingly enough, kingship was not hereditary, but anybody who was fit to lead by like a tribal magistrate could rule, including women, or like 2 kings in dual monarchies.
Interesting.
Some women are Queen Cartimandua of the Brigantes, and then the famous Queen Boudica of the Iceni. So let's go into the question of nudity.
Yes, right.
Well,
what all the folks are waiting for.
Yeah. Before we get into the real goods, on this topic of technology, what I thought was interesting, obviously these are painted as savages, and not just in Deadliest Warrior, but I think that's sort of like the understanding a lot of people have, and that's a depiction of Celts. But if you talk about civilization that used cavalry, used, I believe, naval warfare, if I'm not mistaken, or at least had ships, metalworking. I mean, that's a relatively advanced civilization. So I think it, like, the image of barbarian, from what I read, was mostly portrayed by Greek and Roman writers, who are, I think, especially notorious for other people portraying them as as savage as possible. So that was just technologically what I got.
So you're saying they're dumb brutes?
Yes, Mr. Persian.
Yeah. And
the mortal Celts.
So, Brendan, did they fight with a raging hard on?
It took me a second.
Well, I would have said no, but I did find that they did portray in their own artworks warriors fighting in the nude. And this is referenced by Polybius by the what are they called? Gestate mercenaries fighting at the 225 BC Battle of Telamon. But he says that this could have been for practical reasons, like there's a lot of bushes and brambles, and they didn't want their cloaks or pants getting caught on it. But it more likely was of religious reasons.
Well, I will say, on what you just said reminded me, you watched Aftermath too, right?
Yeah.
The one, William, he's talking about like why they didn't wear clothes. That's a lot of people have questions about. And he says, like, because they thought that like the blood was really dirty, so they thought it would get in the clothes and like soak it in the clothes. So you went naked because you were worried that the blood was dirty? I don't understand.
The clothes were dirty. That's what they thought, that the dirty clothes would infect the wounds. That may have been a practical reason. But Peter Beresford Ellis thinks that it was to increase their martial karma, or spiritual vibrations in battle, and the contact with Mother Earth would ensure rebirth in the other world.
Why'd you fight naked? My balls was hot.
My balls was hot. Brendan, I really appreciate you doing all that research. Do you have anything more to include?
Do I?
Yeah.
I think
we'll come back to some more stuff later about their religion and weapons, obviously, too.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate it because I remember watching this and I was like, the term Celt seems so broad, and what they're describing is such a simple thing, like, oh, these guys are brute savages that ran into battle screaming naked, and I was like, there's got to be more going on here than just like
if I could just
they were nuts.
Insert a little thing. Most of Rome's equipment were made by the Gauls. The Scudum shield, that was based off of a Celt-Iberian design.
The Romans stole the helmet design from
that
the
is
Gauls.
The coolest they used was actually made by the Gauls and sold to the Romans. The Gallic coolest actually didn't have those ear flaps.
Huh. Well, okay. I guess we can move on to one of... How do I put this? One of the biggest betas of history, the Persian Immortals.
I'm sensing some favoritism here.
best known in American culture as the guys who had to cheat to beat 300 Spartans. No, all jokes aside, Lucas, you are our Spartan simp on this podcast. So I found it interesting that you picked the Persian Immortals. The show claims that the Persians built the largest empire the world had ever seen. And so this is interesting because I noticed 3 times the relation of how big this empire is stated in this show, twice by the narrator and once by Ardashir at the very end. And all 3 times it's like incorrect. Like the wording is just a little bit off that makes it incorrect. Like, they say the largest empire the world had ever seen. So I guess maybe that's true. I don't actually know that for a fact. Like at that point in time, maybe it was the largest. But in the intro, they say the largest empire the Middle East has ever seen, which is an outright just not true at all. So there's been multiple empires since then that extended beyond their reach, especially the guy who defeated the Persians, Alexander the Great. I think definition had a bigger one, but ever heard of him?
Had a bigger one.
Zistan. The Persian army was massive. This is, again, claims by the show. The Persian army was massive, and at its core were the Persian Immortals, who always numbered 10,000 strong. Ardashir claims that the name Immortal originates because the Immortals did not leave dead behind on the battlefield, and that whenever one was killed, another one would step up to fill their rank. And I remember learning about this like as a kid, that 10,000, and when one died, another would step up. And I remember Halo Halo has the thing like Spartans never die. And that was like a phrase by the Persian Immortals, like, you know, an immortal never dies or whatever, because they just get replaced. But Lucas, are these claims by the show accurate? Can you tell us a bit of history about the Persian Immortal?
Listen, let me lay some things down here first. Do I like the Spartan? Am I the simp for the Spartan? Maybe. We
know there's some simps out here watching this. We know.
Do I like the Persian Immortal? When I'm here representing the Persian Immortal, I'm going to give it all I got. I'm here representing them, baby. All right, so
true professional.
Yeah, true professional.
Let me get some things straight here out the gate. There is a ridiculous amount of history on the Persian and the Persian Immortals. Not going to be able to fit it all in here, so if you want to learn more than I can give you in a short description here, then I encourage looking them up.
Yeah, I want to remark, I like that Brendan did a ton of research, because a Celt is a really broad term, whereas a Persian Immortal, on the other hand, is an extremely specific term. Like, that is referring to a particular unit of history. Like, there's nothing else that you can confuse it with.
Well, just like a lot of other like very popular ancient warriors too, there is so much debate about what formations they used, what weapons they used. There's like debate on anything you could think about of them. So who were they? They existed 550 to 330 BC. I think the show gives us 500 BC. They were first formed under the reign of Cyrus II, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, after they took Babylon. Later, they were led by various leaders such as Darius and Xerxes, who I'll reference later. Then we get, that is confirmed, the name Persian Immortal was given to an elite heavy infantry unit of 10,000 men. That name was actually given by Herodotus, the Greek historian. And there's actually some debate that Herodotus might have confused the old Persian word for follower with the word for immortal.
Interesting.
So there's actually some skeptical people that believe this inflated their reputation, but that's heavily debated.
The Persian followers is not as cool as the Persian.
There's another hardcore history episode that talks about, I think it's like 3 episodes that talk about the Persian Empire, and Herodotus is basically our best source on the Persian Empire, right? He's like, I don't know if this is true, but people refer to him like as the first historian. Is that right?
Top of my head,
first person to be like, somebody write this shit down.
Right.
Someone's gonna forget it.
The first one. You know, I don't know if that's true, but he's obviously one of the oldest.
The big ones too.
Yeah.
So what I could see there, I couldn't find anything about them removing their dead from the field. I could totally see that. I didn't just get any confirmation for it though. But they did keep up that illusion that they never die, that if a soldier died, a replacement was ready to go.
It seems like a good psychological warfare tactic of like, here is a unit that is called the Immortals, and by all accounts, like we've never seen a dead one of them. If you're like a guy living in a village, like, and the Persians are coming, you're like,
shit,
you know, I could pay taxes to this Xerxes guy.
So where did these replacements actually come from? One of the highest levels of society were called Spada. Not Sparta. Spada. Children from this level of society were taught to ride horses, fire arrows, hunt, live off the land from the age of 5, which they do reference later on the show, and became soldiers at the age of 20 until they retired at the age of 50. Now, the top 10% of this Spada class was considered to be anointed as immortals, if necessary. So the unit served a dual capacity through its role as Imperial Guard, along with their use as shock troops of the Persian Empire's standing army. Most importantly, there were 2 versions of the Persian Immortals throughout history. 3, but that's kind of debated. There was the Achaemenid. I'm mispronouncing that. Also, it's Achaemenid.
I think it's a Achaemenid.
Achaemenid. There you go. Verified. Immortals who were mostly infantry troops, and who is the show is actually referring to as this time period. There was the Sasanian Immortals, who were named after the first group of Immortals, and they were known for being better armed, and they had a lot more cavalry units. So as far as the show's portrayal of armor, feel free to correct me in the comments below, but from what I read, it's accurate enough for the show. They used wicker shields and they were covered in leather with iron and bronze scales. As far as I could find, that's accurate. So, how effective were they in battle? They were deployed with Darius the Great in an attempt to invade Greece, but even with the Immortals, Darius was killed. And their most famous battle...
He wasn't immortal.
No. Their most famous battle, of course, yes, it's those guys, was at Thermopylae after Xerxes' regular troops were pushed back by 300 Spartans. Ever heard of them? The Immortals were sent in expecting to easily finish the job, but that just wasn't the case, and the rest is history, literally.
Persians, come and take them.
Despite these two significant losses, they had many notable victories throughout their lifespan, but none of them were as notable as these two big examples, which kind of puts a damper on them a little bit. But they were disbanded around 323 BC when the Persian Empire was divided, I think in 4 ways, and some accounts say 20 ways. There's a lot of debate on Persian history. I will say that. If you want to dive into that, there's a lot of debate.
We talked about Alexander the Great too, conquering the Persian Empire, and on his death supposedly saying, you know, because they were asking, who do you leave the empire to? And supposedly he said, to the strongest. And that's why his empire immediately fractured on his death, because he had no heir. Okay. Well, I guess we'll touch on a little bit more history about these guys as the episode goes on, but let's switch up to the experts. First and foremost, we have the human tank himself, Francis Brebner.
I call him the Celtic Hulk.
The Celtic Hulk. Shaka would like that. Francis Brebner, he's billed as a Highland Games champion and a descendant of the Scottish clan, the Fighting Farquharsons. If you Google it, it is not spelled how you think it is spelled.
It sounds like an Irish folk band that would play it like Bucko, like Firework Nights or something. It's like in a right field before the game. Check out the Fighting Farquharsons.
Right after the pierogi race.
Yeah.
So Francis is a Highland Games champion. You can find him with an easy Google search. And he is a Scottish Celt descendant. You can find out a lot about his athletic achievements and like a really good bio for him on the International Highland Games website. My last, so I didn't go too much into him because you can read about him if you want to, but the man is a tank.
I think of any of the experts who have a chance of beating Sonny Puzikas in a fight,
yes,
it'd probably be him.
Yeah,
that would be interesting. We'll talk after the show. A lot of thoughts came to my mind, but yeah, definitely if the experts did fight, he would have to be like up there.
I heard they might fight in our sim one of these days that we have got our hands on.
Yeah, we've got our hands on the Slytherin Studios.
It's definitely not WWE 20 or whatever.
The second,
not even the latest one.
The second Celtic expert is William Spencer Dineen, billed as a Celtic warrior descendant and weapons expert. Here's the deal. If you Google Spencer's name, the first results are his Instagram, his Facebook, and his IMDb bio, which unfortunately is not filled out. So unlike some of our experts, Spencer is not interested in writing his own bio on IMDb. So I don't know that much. I wasn't able to find that much information on his background or his job, but he does exist. And what I could find is that he likes paddleboarding, surfing, and crab fishing.
It might be the king of the I wouldn't just be standing there arguments of season 2.
Well,
I mean,
the Persian team is a little guilty of that.
This whole
There's a lot of competition for that on this episode.
This whole episode is so bad with that, dude.
No clear indication on why he would have been on the show, but I mean, he probably just auditioned and answered the casting call. So, onto the Persian team, we have Ardashir Radpour, Persian historian, equestrian, and direct descendant of Persian nobility. So the show bills that he has 25 years of experience with Persian archery and weapons. He claims, Ardashir that is, the Persian Immortal were the special forces of the ancient world.
There we go.
And of course, later
every time you
and of course, later in the episode, the narrator describes them as highly trained commandos of the Persian Empire. Can we get a ding ding? That is one of our favorite tropes, is Deadliest Warrior calling an ancient warrior the special forces, the Navy
who watch
SEAL.
the show can't understand what these warriors are unless you compare it to like a commando or
The
something.
Navy SEAL, the Delta
Yeah.
Force, the Army Ranger of its time. These guys were highly trained commandos.
The problem is whenever you get to Navy SEAL, what do you call them? Do you call them the commandos of the Navy SEAL?
Now, yeah,
Persian Immortals.
Persian Immortals in the modern world. Ding ding. So
The Navy SEALs are kind of like the Spartans of the modern world.
Well,
So-
the sad thing is they do that though all the time. They call people like Spartan race.
Yeah.
So you can find a lot about Ardashir as well with a quick Google search. I mean, he's an actor and stunt actor who has been in a number of movies and TV shows, including Batman vs. Superman and The Book of Boba Fett. And in case you watch The Book of Boba Fett, he plays a number of Klatooians, including the Klatooian boss.
What are the Klatooians? What do they look like?
They look like an alien man. Google them. Now, he is, in fact, a professional horseback rider, and he was born in Iran. You can find a ton of information about him on his website, radpour.com.
I'm so glad you went there because I have radpour.com too.
It's his last name.com, and I highly recommend a visit to this website because you can read his bio, but more importantly, you can see his photo galleries. And he has some cosplay shots of him as an ancient Persian warrior, as well as like some other sets. He's in like a chapter of the 501st cosplay group that does like the charity stuff or whatever. And so he's on there in like a stormtrooper outfit. And I did see in his IMDb credits, he's in like almost every episode of that new Obi-Wan show that's set to come out on
Yeah, I
Disney
did see that
Plus.
too.
It's as a stunt actor. So
He has a lot
What
of
if he plays
credits.
Obi-Wan?
what if he just comes back as a Klatooian? So keep an eye out for Ardashir if you're a Star Wars fan. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, did you see on there? He claimed this was he wrote that bio obviously himself on his website. He said he is a Zoroastrian Persian, sharing a tradition going back to the time of Cyrus the Great. He has strived to keep alive and promote the proud history of the ancient Persians.
So what I glean from that is this guy is a stunt actor, and they hire a lot of stunt actors to be experts on this show. But what he is legit about is he does seem to have like a passion for like Persian history and culture, and he comes from Iran, so he probably has a lot of Iranian relatives and stuff.
I love that whether it's true or not, like the show's always like, oh, he's nobility. But like even on this guy's own website, he's claiming to be nobility from like the Persian Empire, I mean, who 2,500 years ago.
Who do you think told the show? Then we have Cyrus Sahiri, who is billed as Persian Swordmaster. I think Cyrus was an actor at one point. I found him on backstage.com, available for casting calls. I was a little hesitant to click on backstage.com, but it wasn't, anything dirty.
As long as it's not Backpage.
However, more importantly, he is now a real estate agent based out of San Jose, California, and I found his profile on Zillow.com. You guys can find him if you just search him up as like real estate, but maybe I can just have Craig post a screenshot. It's got his picture, it's got his little elevator pitch to book him.
So you got Cyrus the Great and Cyrus the Realtor.
Yes.
I'm sure he's a great realtor.
Cyrus the Great Realtor.
Yeah.
So if you're in the San Jose area or you're looking to move there, give Cyrus a call. Tell him we recommended you.
Yeah.
Tell him to come on the podcast.
Tell him to come on the pod. I couldn't find anything else about him beyond like the Zillow.com and the Backstage.com thing. He does have the Deadliest Warrior wiki curse, where that's like all you can find about him. So I have no idea if he knows anything about Persian weapons. He was most likely just cast as like an actor in the episode.
He says a quote immediately, and he goes, like, the first thing he gets to say on the camera is, the Persians have the best weapons and best armor. But historically, that was not the case at all. Their enemies tended to have slightly better weapons and armor, but they won by sheer numbers.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Like relative to what? Like all time or just ancient? Like,
it's a really funny phrase because I come to understand that the Persians were very lightly armored, like almost none at all, and they had wicker shields, and that was mostly because of their numbers. Like it would have been too expensive for them to armor up everybody like a Spartan hoplite. But when you get into a situation like Thermopylae, that's what allowed this solid unit of like armored guys to fight off a bunch of unarmored infantry just like rushing up against their shields. Anyways, Cyrus is also like, I feel like Cyrus is high the whole episode too. He's kind of staring off into space, and like, I don't know, man. Call him up if you're looking for a house. So I guess, unless you guys have anything to add, we can get into the weapons. Whew. And boy, do we start with a doozy. The Celtic longsword. Marked as 36 inches, 5 pounds, double-edged blade, forged from iron and copper. To intro this weapon, they show a segment where Celts collected the heads of their fallen foes. Spencer says that to possess someone's head was to possess a magical power. Brendan, is there any truth to this? And is the weapon they're presenting here accurate? Because, you know, longtime fan of the show, Real Shino, emailed us and claimed that this is not a Celtic longsword necessarily. So I would like your input on the collecting of the heads and the accuracy of this Celtic longsword.
Yes. Heads were of vital importance to the Celts, and their religion, instead of the heart being the center of the soul, like some other cultures, mainly Greek, the head was the center of the soul. And if you had somebody's head, you pretty much had their soul in your hand. And we even have Caesar, I think it was Caesar. There's reports that the Celts would preserve heads of very important enemies or, you know, distinguished people that they happen across. And they would preserve them in cedar oil and present them to guests, and would brag that they would turn down large sums of money for these heads.
It's actually where the term "getting head" comes from. Believe it or not, it's a Celtic term.
Yeah. And in terms of the longsword, it is actually really good for 400 BC. It is similar to a late Hallstatt, early Latin antenna hilt design. Okay. The 3-foot length is on the short end, but the longsword lengths could go from blade lengths 55 centimeters, which is like 26 inches, I believe, up to 90 centimeters, which is a little over 3 feet. So it would be like another hilt longer than that for the longest of longswords. So it is really good job. Good job, Dave Baker.
Okay.
My fact that I'm going to add in there is that the Celtic longsword is actually the short-range weapon of Hannibal in the Deadliest Warrior Legends game.
Really?
There's no Celt. I mean, I imagine it's an alternate, because that game, there's like a few different options to choose from. So they're like, let's just fucking give it to Hannibal.
Shout out to the Deadliest Warrior game. I don't know how we haven't made a video with that game.
we will, trust us. I got all the DLC.
So
could I? Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, longswords were very popular among the nobility, especially these long ones. They were slashing swords, mainly used in cavalry or chariots. The shorter swords were mainly used for infantry, but they were used. So this was a chariot weapon. It was a chariot weapon,
because they do test it from a chariot.
So
okay,
on the short side, like I said, but for 400 BC, this is perfect. It combines the Hallstatt and the Latin cultures.
Mr. Dave Baker. I don't claim to know what's going on in the man's head, but maybe he made it shorter because it is labeled as the Celt's short-range weapon. I don't know, but cool. Well, Francis tests the sword against a ballistic gel in Craig's favorite kind of test where someone just goes ham on a ballistics gel because it doesn't tell you anything. But it is cool to watch. He savagely decapitates it. There's a really cool shot in slow-mo of the sword sinking into the target's skull, like through the bone. And afterward, Francis is standing there with the sword, and he's got like this badass blood splattered on his face.
Honestly, he's like 90% of this episode, he's just covered in that blood.
That is sweaty. Every time they interview him, he's bloody and sweaty.
It's hard, if you're that jacked, it's hard to not look cool. But did you guys think that the blade like seemed really blunt? Like, if you look at the slow-mo, it does not seem very sharp. And I feel like if that dude had a giant like butter knife, he would do the same thing.
It probably wasn't sharpened to its fullest extent just to
For safety probably
reasons.
on the show.
Yeah. I
They
don't
should
know.
have had Francis do it naked for authenticity.
So
Did Jeff look like that?
I wouldn't have liked it though.
yeah, Jeff, can we mention, Craig, you brought up Jeff. What do you think about Jeff and Francis here?
Jeff just has a man crush on him.
Yeah.
Not like, and respectful. Like how
Yeah.
like one dude who goes to the gym. Like Jeff used to be in the buffest dude on the set. So when he saw Francis, instead of being a hater, he was just like loving it, you know?
Yeah,
That's what I think happened.
There is like the male body type that's meant for the female gaze, where it's like lean and abs and some muscle. Francis is the male body type for the male gaze. Like even straight men are like, dude, that guy is fucking awesome. Look at it. Look how big that guy is.
You guys are glancing over detail of that test also. He finishes and Jeff goes, 78 miles an hour. Nice. So are you kidding me? 78 miles an hour? Bullshit.
We might have finally found something that can contest with the Spartan Shield.
78 miles an hour?
Which, if you guys are old fans,
It's like a fastball.
the Spartan Shield checked in at like the velocity of a shuttle, space shuttle.
Motion is a space
The
shuttle launch.
G-force.
Yeah. There's
So
G-force.
78 miles an hour.
in response to this test, we get our first but not last of the episode. We wouldn't just be standing there argument that we love from Deadliest War. We love this argument, folks. The producers, I'm convinced it's just a generic line they feed to like any actor that comes on the show. Like, just bring up the fact that you would be moving around,
Or it's the I have no other argument. It's just like
Yeah.
the no you.
well, like, this would never happen. Because I wouldn't be standing there. So in like season 1 fashion, Artisher is like, okay, but we're wearing armor, which I immediately thought was silly because he puts the armor on the table and the armor clearly covers like this. If Francis like beheaded the dummy in the neck, I'm like, that wouldn't have done a thing. And so Francis slashes against the armor. He breaks some scales off, and according to Jeff, generates enough pressure to break a rib. And we get a line from Jeff where he goes, "Francis, these arms are doing some work."
And he like caresses his arms.
I just remarked,
At least he's, actually testing the armor.
right? Yeah, we will get to that later on in the episode. Jeff remarks that Francis's arms are the size of most people's legs. He loves it, man. I do have a quick grievance relievance.
I got a big one coming.
The scaled armor, I'm a little upset because we've had warriors on this show and in episodes to come where they give them incorrect armor, and the correct armor to give them was a type of scaled armor. And I always just assumed it's too complicated to make or it's too expensive. And then it showed up in this episode and I was like, "Gah!" But, not a big deal. It was just is what it is. So we then get a super chaotic cut where they're just like, let's test this from a chariot. But I guess it does make sense because it was among the nobles and the cavalry. So they have Dave Baker test the sword from the chariot.
Can I tell you my nickname? Dave Baker, sword maker.
You should roll with that. It's important to note that the chariots have... Okay, I was wrong on this. They do get mentioned before this. When I first watched the episode, I didn't catch it. I was like, have they been mentioned? But Jeff does bring them up at the beginning. It's a little bit random of a test, but it is a really fun, like Dave cuts a man's face in half, and Dorian's on one this episode. He's feeling himself. The good doctor drops a lot of jokes, and I wrote them all down. And he comes up to the target and he goes,
"Say hello to Pac-Man."
"Say hello to Pac-Man." Everybody's impressed with the clean cut, except for Artisher, who is quickly proving to be an annoying expert. He just starts making shit up. He's like, "It's just never going to happen. Like, the Celt in his chariot will never get that close to us. And if he does get that close, we will actually kill him before he can reach with that sword." I'm like, come on, dude. Like, it's pretty cool. Like, he did cut the head off. Like, but what I love is when he's making this argument, they cut to Jeff's face, and you'll see it when you go in, Craig. Like, Jeff is just not buying it at all. Jeff's face is like, okay.
Yeah.
So Spencer appropriately responds that Artisher's comment is asinine, and Max punctuates the conversation by going, "Boosh," with his head flying off.
I will say, when they introduced the chariot test, you see some really badass B-roll footage of like these two Celts trying to like stand up on the, I'm talking about, on the chariot. They're like,
when they randomly bring in too, like they're like, "Oh, this test is so deadly, we need to bring in an expert, Dave Baker." So I actually was like, I want to know, who is Dave Baker? So he is Dave Baker, the sword maker. Yeah. According to the History Channel, Dave Baker is a world-renowned swordsmith who specializes in recreating some of the world's rarest edge weapons, and he is featured, if you want to see more of them, on Forged in Fire. He is one of the judges on Forged in Fire,
which we have mentioned before as the spiritual successor to Deadliest Warrior. Now, no show is like Deadliest Warrior, but that comes the closest as far as just people taking blade weapons and hacking at a gel dummy.
yeah, it's like the Bloodborne to the Dark Souls of Deadliest Warrior.
Sure. Did anybody else have anything to say about the longsword test?
Dave Baker, sword maker.
Okay.
There is boosh. It is kind of weird because I watched this one documentary that you really should watch. It's called The Celts, Blood, Iron, and Sacrifice. It's on BBC. And they have this one guy from the Royal Armory say how to use...
That is British Broadcast Channel. Lucas, for the Lucases out there.
Or our big barbarian.
Right.
I was coughing.
But anyway, he explains how to use the longsword. You use it kind of like you would a saber. You use the length of it to like cut through something. And he even uses a pig. So if you're, looking for some more Deadliest Warrior pig cutting, go watch that documentary.
Yeah.
It's episode 3.
He cuts the closest thing to human flesh, a pig carcass. So they go to commercial, and then they come back, and they introduce the Persian Immortal Sargeras, which stats in at 30 inches, 2 pounds, wood shaft and iron head. And I thought the narrator has some funny intros in this one. The writer was feeling himself a little bit too. It's introed as a badass battle axe. Did Lucas write that?
You'd think so.
Now I wrote down hearing him say badass. Is like,
I also thought it was really funny that Cyrus intros this weapon by explaining what an axe is. He's like swinging it like this, and he goes, "It's designed to swing like a pendulum." So
the way this weapon was designed was almost sort of like a pendulum. It gets plenty of force just coming down.
You let the weight do the work.
He's like, "I'm a realtor and I have never held an axe before."
So Lucas, you want to tell us a little bit about the Sargeras?
Yeah, sure. So this was a real weapon. Examples have been collected from Eurasian archaeological excavations. When
Say
you look
that
up,
3 times fast.
Try it. When you look up this weapon, you get a lot of entries for the Scythian axe, which was the special weapon of Attila the Hun. So from what I've read, summed up, they are essentially the same style axe, and the name is almost interchangeable. It's just, it was an axe back in that time period. It had a billion different names. It was just a weapon that had a cutting edge on one side and a pick-like point on the other for piercing armor. And it was where a lot of the record of it comes from. It was depicted in a lot of ancient Greek pottery and other surviving iconic material.
Okay.
But that's pretty much it.
Real Shino in his research mentioned to us that, the Persians did have access to like bronze short swords and daggers and stuff. So,
of course, I've stopped doing that to a point where I take the show anymore as it's presented.
They're mixing it up. They're trying to put an axe. It drove me crazy when they gave the Roman centurion the Delabra, but this is not that episode. So, Sargeras.
Before you get to the test, I want to be the one who says it's so bad.
Okay.
I love they show this ballistics gel torso and the intestines are just full of shit. Like, that's the driving point. Like, they told him, you gotta puncture that and have shit flying everywhere.
So Max, after Cyrus tells him what an axe is, Max is like, he specifically says he wants to see the full capabilities, but then Cyrus only ever uses the pike end. I'm interested, like, we mentioned maybe blunting the edges on the sword a little bit. I'd be willing to bet if they knew they weren't going to use the slashing end, that they probably did like not have it sharpened just for safety reasons.
Probably.
That's probably why they do it. And what is it? As at this point in the show, when they're reviewing the damage from the Sargeras, Cyrus just goes into the intestines, like you said, Lucas.
Shit-filled intestines.
I said Dorian should be fired from his career as a doctor because he's killing me with these one-liners. He goes on to describe how the punctures to the intestines would cause a septic death, saying that poopage would spill and fungus would grow. It's just like, what a funny poopage.
Is that a medical term?
And then he says, and then of course he caps it all off by saying, now he wouldn't die instantly, but this is, let's just say, a shitty way to go.
Come on, he wouldn't die instantly from taking an axe to the stomach also. Get real. Also,
the fact that it's always funny when they do that on this show, like, oh, you get a concussion or you get stabbed in the stomach and it's not an instant death. And it's like, yeah, but if you get hit and you fall over, like,
dude, my intestines are on the ground. I can still, fight somebody.
Just some poopage.
It's just some poopage.
I think this is the test. But the Celt, who the show portrays as the naked warrior, whenever faced with this weapon, I think it's William who's like, oh, yeah, we would have been heavily armored in all the vital areas. Here. And it's like, okay. So, you can't be cool and say you fight naked with a boner, and then all of a sudden, when it's convenient, yeah, actually, anywhere you would hit, we would have armor.
It's just armor everywhere except the dick.
Segue. That's the main weapon. So segueing into the armor, they test the Sargeras against the Celt's leather belt, iron helmet.
The Celtic WWE belt.
Yes, yeah, it is like a leather WWE champ belt. And against they're supposed to test it against a shield. We'll get to that. Ardashir says some more obnoxious stuff, referring to the helmet as a tin can. I think he calls the leather belt a girdle. And so before we get into that test, I do want to say, Brendan, Craig, are these accurate to like Celtic armor of the time?
Well, William Spencer Dineen, he says that it's a coolest helmet, and it looks more like a port, but on further research, it is a coolest type, but it was more used. This specific type was more used by the Romans. The Celts would use more simpler, just sort of almost reverse jockey cap kind of coolest helmet, and typically they're made of bronze, not iron.
Okay. I was wondering if that helmet was just a prop left over from the Centurion episode that they didn't use.
That's exactly what I was thinking. And as for the leather belts, we don't have much evidence because leather kind of disintegrates. So
great point.
It could be used by some of the less poor or some of the less wealthy.
Yeah,
but
it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And it is, so the leather doesn't like stop the Sargeras. I'll get into the test, but it doesn't stop it necessarily from hitting him, but it does get stuck in the leather. It is important to note that it does stick in that leather for a time.
If you're an axe stuck in your stomach, though.
But how they never show how far it really penetrates. Like,
I mean, it goes all the way. Like, it touches the belt.
I don't know if it would almost kind of like right around where your guts would be. I don't know that I'm not a doctor. I wouldn't know where the guts would be.
Craig editing this, check the test footage, see how deep that Sargeras goes, or just edit a big no across the screen.
You know what would help this test if he didn't miss like horribly with all of his shots with his axe too.
So I'll say Artisher for this armor test straight up cheats right out the gate and just takes the Celt shield, hooks it, and just throws it to the ground. It's like, I understand you want to get it out of the way to hit the target, but like at least hit the shield first. Was he instructed to do that, or do you think he was just being a dickhead?
Look how easy this is.
During the test, he was like, well, I'm not going to waste my time. Just like,
he was instructed. If you listen to what he says right before that, they're going like, oh, we have a belt, we have a helmet, we have a shield. And he says, okay, I'll move the shield out of the way, hit the belt, then hit that. So he actually says what he's going to do before he does it. My theory is...
I know what you're talking about, and he doesn't necessarily say he's going to do that. He says... that's the same part where he says a girdle and a tin can. He's like, oh, a shield that can be easily moved or whatever. Yeah.
My theory is,
but this is an armor test. It's not. Yeah. I know you can grab a shield with your hand and fucking.
Yeah, but you can grab somebody's shield and they have a sword. Just
right. Yeah.
I have a theory because you can use those axes for kind of like ripping people's shields away. I feel like it was supposed to be like showcasing that, but it just looks really dumb because the sword or the shield is just kind of.
They should have at least said it because they're like, this is an armor test, and Francis aimed right for the bronze scales. Like he didn't cheat. And then this guy, it's like, I know he aims for the leather and the helmet, but he just totally doesn't buy it. Maybe that shield was like, they got that from somebody and the guy was like, please don't. Like,
I need that back.
So they were like, all right, we're going to stand it up. Artisher, move that shield out. don't hit that. But it is worth noting, he delivers 3 strikes with the pike end of the Sargeras. It penetrates the leather belt. And it also penetrates the helmet, and he does like an extra shot to the heart to show what it would do to a Macy's mannequin.
I believe that was 322 plus PSI, maxed it out to the skull.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, he's like, you maxed it. And Jeff's like, you maxed it out.
Jeff's hard science on the show. So, does anyone have anything to say about this test, or before we go to the edge?
I just wish we'd see how the shield would hold up.
Yeah.
Like even if it was in a separate test or something, but somebody, paid a lot of money for that shield, so that's okay. I respect that.
Let's get that as a prop on this podcast, the shield, and we'll like totally rearrange the set to like squeeze that in. So
it's right in the middle. We're all on the side.
Isn't this cool, guys?
Don't break. I'll be like, that's in the way. Let me take that down.
Just lay it like right in front of here.
So, I do want to mention, since we're on prop topics, apparently we've been displaying our samurai swords completely incorrectly, and we were put to task by the Max Geiger on Twitter, who said, like, in the Xenu Games DMs, he was like, you need to fix those samurai swords. That is some amateur shit. And I was like, oh my God. And I Googled it, and he was right. So it's fixed. All right. To segue over, Dorian gives the edge to the long sword due to the superior damage it was able to produce. Do we agree? Let's start with Brendan. Do you agree on the edge here?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. Craig? Yes. Lucas, do you agree with the edge?
Grievance relievance. Hold on, I'm joking. Grievance relievance time, okay? So,
it's got to get more fiery,
Let me just get this straight. And this isn't even so much like real life. This is Deadliest Warrior style. So the axe pierces the belt, which is what they were testing, and Armand points that out. He misses the initial swing on the helmet, but he pierces straight through the helmet on the other swing. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Celtic sword failed to penetrate the Persian armor. And they bring up the edge on this one. They don't even mention the armor again in the reason for the edge.
It is interesting because it breaks formula of this show where when they do an armor test, it is specifically designed to like give an edge to a weapon, typically. Like one penetrated and one did not. So I do get where you're coming from there. I would say, based on what the show presents, I think you do have a case. in my opinion,
It's like anti-Deadliest Warrior for the one that did not penetrate armor to get the edge.
I feel like that armor is not covering enough of the Immortal. And the Celt, number one, the sword can be used in tandem with a shield. I've beaten that horse to death multiple podcasts. They just don't ever bring it up, really. And also the Celt is being portrayed as like a 6 foot tall buff dude in this one, and I just tend to think if this is short range, like he should probably get the edge in close range combat or whatever, versus
I'll disagree
like a
on this
two-handed pickaxe or whatever. So
even just size out, just at the end of the day, per like the formula of the show, one failed to go through armor, which is a significant portion of the chest.
I respect that point.
And I think that's pretty. Oh yeah, they base it off of that. You could swing it off a chariot. Yeah. They literally do the same thing with the Persian also. They have him. Why didn't they test both spears off of the chariots instead and have the sword and axe?
We're not there yet.
Yeah. Like the formula that they use for this episode doesn't make sense.
That's what I was talking about, where this has some chaos energy going on it. It's just like it just randomly jumps around for shit. Craig, you know your alphabets, right? Can you tell me what comes after W?
X.
We're into the X factors here. So the Celt's X factor is, per the show, direct quote, his willingness to do anything to gain a psychological edge against his enemy. They cite war paint, shaggy appearance, and a battle cry. Do you guys say anything about this?
I do think they're the only warrior to do any of those things. So I think that's an appropriate X factor.
They show Francis and Spencer doing some fake wrestling. I would pay to watch that.
Oh, dude. Yeah.
Just pick up Spencer, like break
I'm
him.
sure Spencer's a good guy and he's got to be in shape to be like a regular surfer, but yeah, it's like fighting Bane.
It's like if you put me and Big Show in the ring and I'd be like, holy shit.
It's like wrestling like a rock wall. It's like when you're a kid and you get pissed off and you decide to like punch your wall because you're pissed and you're like, oh, that was a bad fucking idea. I'm not going to do that again.
Do you have anything to add to this psychological warfare?
Yes,
X
that
factor?
was one of the main strategies that the Celts would use against, either other Celts or pretty much anybody who they were fighting. Because if you think about it, most armies that were fighting would field levies or just citizen soldiers, just farmers. And what they did is all at a time they would have these big sort of trumpet things called a carnix, and we even have like attestations of some of the classical writers, like they would say how deeply a lot of these war cries, it like reverberated, felt like an earthquake. Because at that time, like things weren't as quiet or things weren't as loud as they are now. And also they would just think about it. They have this carnix, these trumpets, hundreds of war cries, all simultaneously. People are naked. They have severed heads. Which, if you think about it, it's probably the religious significance came after, like, you're holding a head. Oh, we won. They just ran away. This must be some importance.
That is funny. Yeah, it definitely would not only like put fear into an enemy, but also like hype you up a lot.
Yeah.
It's like
and they were also
listening to a hype song, like
very accomplished skirmishers as well. And I will get into how the sling in skirmishing would be very important in demoralizing an opponent and opposing force. But that isn't to say that they didn't always use complex or these simple stratagems. Like at the Battle of the Alia, Brennus outmaneuvered his Roman opponent, routing his cavalry, covering his right flank, and then circled around, going down the length of the Roman phalanx.
Okay.
So, and even Caesar says that the Helvetii fought in a phalanx. So it wasn't like Celt is so broad. You could have some people like just running at people, but others being, a bit smarter about it.
And in the Immortals X Factor, it's labeled that they have an entire life devoted to war. We see some footage from the Spartan episode, but I noticed in the Spartan episode, they have like the grayscale turned up. Like I don't know, what would you call it? Like they have it filtered so it's like gray, like the 300 movie. And then in this episode they get rid of that filter so it's like really sunny, like the rest of the footage for the Persian.
Like how in every movie, like Mexico is just orange.
Yes, exactly. It was really funny. I was like, they're trying to switch this up under my nose, but I see it. And the Immortals in this segment are credited as the killers of the Spartan 300 at the Thermopylae.
I guess.
It's yeah, I was like, that's such a technicality. Like, I mean, they encircled it. It was kind of the whole Persian army. But so it is mentioned that they got the best food and equipment provided to them and that they had a lot of training and discipline. You want to tell us a little bit about this, Lucas?
Yeah, entire life dedicated to war.
I was about to say,
hell yeah, bitch.
were they picked like a... You mentioned the 10%.
That kind of goes back into the Sparta class,
Okay.
where that class was, at 5 years old, they were taken and trained, and then the top 10% of those. I think that's what they're getting at with those. When they say they're given the best food and supplies, that's just partly because they were part of the upper class in society. But supposedly the Immortals themselves each had attendants that would serve them, and special food was carried with them that was reserved only for their consumption, according to the ever-reliable Wikipedia.
Okay, well.
You know who's going to be fighting naked real soon? Me, it's warm in here today, boys.
It is hot in here. It's at that stage right now where it's either 30 degrees or 65 degrees at any given time. And so I have the heat on in the house, but sometimes it gets up to like 70 degrees and I wish the AC was on. But
I ditched the jacket.
Anyways, I noticed that this narrative is very similar to, as I mentioned earlier, like Viking versus Samurai, where it's like you have one who's psychological and brutal and just ferocity is sort of the X factor, and then the other one, it's training and discipline and the best equipment,
This debate. Sort of the best equipment they had.
Yeah, for the time. So we get into the next weapon test, where we see the Lancea. So this is 8.5 feet, 4.5 pounds, with a wood shaft and an iron head. We get a lot of wood shaft and iron heads in this episode. I got sick of typing it after a while. So they show, when they intro the weapon, that it can be used as both a stabbing and a throwing weapon. However, it's only ever tested as a throwing weapon. Brendan and Craig, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Lancea?
I actually had quite a bit of trouble just with the name Lancea, because nobody seems to agree on the actual purpose. I've seen it's just a fighting spear, I've seen it's a lance, or I've seen it's a pike. And there's other names like a Geisum. I've seen that is a spear, or that could be a javelin. There's a Mataris, which could be a pike, or a javelin, or a spear. And there's a Tragula, which could be a light javelin, or a sledgehammer. So I'm just going with Peter Beresford Ellis, his definition that Lancea is just the fighting spear. You would not throw this. It was part of like the warrior panoply. You would have to have this to fight. If you threw this, like, that was pretty much your only thing. You would have specific javelins to use, like either light or heavy javelins, depending upon the range or if you could afford it or not.
Yeah, it is interesting because they have a throwing spear in the Viking episode too, and to me it just runs so counterintuitive to like what a spear, like the fact that you're picking up a spear and just chucking it at some guy, like hoping you hit him. And they say in this episode, they're like, the Lancea was even more effective when it was thrown. And I remember just being like, how is it more effective in any way? If it's like, it gives it a slightly better reach, but it's already a long weapon. You would think you're dealing more power by thrusting it than you are by throwing it. It's also far more accurate. You're pointing it and stabbing.
I was gonna say, facing an armored enemy too that has this covered up, you would want to hold it to be way more accurate. You're gonna throw and you're gonna probably hit somewhere that's armored.
Because to me, 6 foot tall guy versus 5'8" guy, if his head's not covered, that's significant for a sword. But with this weapon, where it's not a super like accurate weapon, you're right. Like having the torso covered I think would be a critical advantage for the Immortal. I will say Shino mentioned in his notes that like he wrote that the Lancea is a Latene spear.
That's the material culture.
Okay, known from being found in a tomb. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
The
something
specific flame blade. That wasn't from 400 BC. That would usually be a bit further. Like,
is there a reason that it's shaped that way, like a flame? Like, is there a significance that we know about?
Well, the Celts actually had a lot of different designs for their spears. Like, there's, if you think of a normal leaf spear, they would have like 2 semicircles like cut out at these points that would just like rip right through you. And then they have these other ones that are just cut out. It looks absolutely brutal. But
nice.
Well, yeah, they would use these on the typical spears and also in javelins. So this would be pretty heavy for a javelin. But
I did think it was odd. We'll get to why I think they use this solely as a throwing weapon. But Francis throws 3 Lanceas that we see.
78 miles an hour, I'm assuming.
He grazes with the first shot, and then he skewers with the second and third. Cyrus gives us the second instance of, well, we wouldn't just be standing there. And Ardashir remarks, you threw your weapon away. I think that's a fair point. And you were saying, Brendan, like, you wouldn't throw your weapon away like that.
Yeah, if you're going to throw anything, you brought it to throw it.
Yeah, especially when, you know, the Celt later on has a long-range weapon. He has a sling. Like, why would he throw a bunch of rocks and then when the guy gets in close be like, yeah.
It is cool to see Francis throw it.
It is cool, and when it skewers that pig, I wish they had done like stabbing and then just had him throw it. But
the stabbing probably would have looked so much cooler.
Yeah, probably. But
he would have cut that thing in half.
Dorian does remark we get a little man crush from Dorian too, not just Jeff. Dorian says, in Francis's hands, it looks like a toothpick. Guys just love big guys. It's just a thing. Like, he's a big guy. So they introduced the Persian Immortal Spear as the counter to this. 6.5 feet, 5.5 pounds, wood shaft and iron head again. And it is billed as a sinister skewer guaranteed to nail an enemy to the gates of hell. It's like, it's a spear. So before I ask you about it, I do want to say Ardashir intros this weapon, and we need to grow up on this podcast, but it sounds very phallic to me. He's like touching it, and he's like showing all the boys his spear, and he's like,
it's a leaf-shaped spear. It's very thick. It's very broad. The other side of it has a ball head on it. This can also be used as a clubbing instrument.
It's a leaf-shaped spear. It's very thick, very broad. And on the other side of it, it has a ball head.
Very reminiscent of Alexander the Great.
Yeah, I was like...
like later he's like, this can smash through armor, light shields, heavy shields.
Yes.
Like, is there anything that this... like the blunt end of this spear can't defeat?
Yeah, he's like, this is for crushing armor. And I'm like, maybe not. Lucas, before we get into the tests, do you want to talk about the Persian Immortal Spear?
Good luck Googling that, because it's called the fucking spear.
Yeah. First thing when you Google Persian Spear, which was my first stop on my journey, was the Deadliest Warrior wiki.
Yes.
So let's get the facts straight. We know essentially every ancient warrior of this time period had spears of various different types. So there's no question of would they have used a spear. So we can get past that. I had to really dig for information on this one. And the best I could find is that, yes, around 500 BC, they carried spears, but there is absolutely no record of what they found. Like some remnants that they believed to be spears, but there is no record of what actual shape head they had, whether they had the ball on the back. In other words, I'm not sure exactly what it looked like, but yes, they carried a spear.
Usually the other end of a spear is just like a counterbalance, typically, right?
Yeah. I mean, but they go on so much about this ball that I thought I would find something about it. And I was getting into some real, like, deep digs of like, oh, here's this and this, and it seemed like the most common spear that had a leaf-shaped head and a like ball for a counterbalance that can be used for bashing was from Japan, which isn't far off, but it's not
far enough off. especially for that time period. I just try to think of like that spear is like 6.5 feet long is what they label it as. So like you have a 6.5 foot long like baseball bat. It's like a baseball bat that's taller than you, and you're trying to like swing it, and the other end is sharp, so you don't want to hit yourself with it. And so I really don't know how effective it would be at smashing, which is probably why they don't show.
The most record I could really get was honestly like art painted on stuff that they've recovered, and it just seemed like a pretty basic spear. And they had those cutouts in their shield that I think they even show on the show, where they would put the shield in front of them and stick the spear in the cutouts, but it was just a wood shaft with like a regular iron head.
Yeah, iron shaped head.
So that's the best I can offer you.
I think I read somewhere that they were depending upon your rank, the counterbalance would be of different materials. Like I think Herodotus says like there's the silver apple bearers and the
Shino mentioned in his email that it was more of like an ornament on the end.
Yeah, but it'd probably be a good counterbalance. Like move that center of gravity back.
I wrote that we do see it being used as a stabbing and clubbing weapon in like a little reenactment, and we get a pretty funny scream edit. So I love our scream edits.
If they use it from cavalry, I can see a counterbalance being on the other end, so you can hold it farther back to stab people from cavalry. So I could see that.
Maybe. So to test this, Ardashir does it from the chariot. He stabs 2 mannequins with the spear, dragging the second one behind the chariot. And William Spencer Dineen gives us our 3rd instance in the episode, but the first of the Celts, I'm so disappointed, of wouldn't be standing there. Like, well, this is never going to happen. The Celts going to be jumping around. He's going to be moving. The IRA would have lookouts.
I think they wanted this test to look really badass. Like on paper, they're like, you're going to be riding down horses, kicking up smoke, and you're going to stab the dummies. And it kind of looks underwhelming.
I do appreciate the work they put in, but yeah, it does come off as very underwhelming. Like the Lancea test is like cooler. Like when that spear cuts right through that pig, it's like, oh, that's badass. And then this Ardashir is just like Donna Macy's mannequin.
Well, did you put what his exact quote was about not getting hit?
No, go ahead.
He said the Celt would have to be blind, deaf, armless, with no legs to get hit by that.
He describes what the mannequin looks like. It's like the next level of the wouldn't just be standing there. The edge. Dorian gives they let the good doctor just hand out the edges on this episode. I think Max gives to give 1. Dorian gives the edge to the Persian spear specifically because you can stab multiple times with it, whereas the Lancea, you're throwing it, even though they say that the Lancea can be used as a spear. What do we have opinions on this?
I sort of like, not an opinion on the actual thing, but it's weird how they handle the spears, where they treat one as a throwing spear and one from cavalry, which is kind of looping back to they do the opposite what they did with the sword and the axe.
It's not just that it's used as a melee tool instead of a throwing weapon. It's also like used from a chariot.
Yeah.
So
they don't just do a straight up piercing test, but I guess that would have been just kind of redundant because they probably would have performed similar.
That's my take on this, is that I think this is a case of 2 weapons being too similar. So the show like had to do something to differentiate them, both for entertainment factor and also for like the purpose of giving the edges out. Craig, any thoughts on the edge?
They're both spears.
Yeah. I concur.
It's tough to compare them in a meaningful way.
I guess I'd take the one with the ball on the end of it because maybe it has a use.
Yeah. Brendan, same take pretty much.
Flip a coin. Spear's a spear.
Yeah. So then we get into everybody's favorite test of the episode, the Burda, which is essentially just a stick, versus the chariot scythe, which is a chariot specific weapon. This is a trope of our podcast, bringing up the fact when 2 weapons are so dissimilar, like how the hell can this has to take the cake, doesn't it, guys? I know we say that every episode, but this has to take the cake of like, how the fuck do you compare these two things? Like, you know, we usually say this for stuff like, how do you compare a flamethrower against a shotgun? How do you compare a wooden club against a chariot scythe and say which one is better? Like, and I guess I think that's the point, because they do mention at one point, like the narrator's like, it's a savage brute weapon versus, you know, a technical weapon. I didn't write down the quote, but I think they're trying to further illustrate that one of these guys is, you know, a big oaf with a club, and the other one is, you know, precise and wealthy. So let's get into the Burda. Burda is listed as 21 inches, 2 pounds, wood shaft, and iron bands. It's introed as a brain splattering bludgeon. And the narrator says that it's deceptively primitive. I put three question marks because I was like, it's a stick. There's nothing deceptively.
Wouldn't it be deceptively like sophisticated or something? Like it looks pretty primitive.
He's saying like, man, it sure looks primitive, but it's not. And it's like, but it is. It's like the oldest weapon in the book.
The way you phrase it, it's like, deceptively primitive means it looks really advanced, but it's actually primitive.
Yeah, you're right. He says deceptively primitive. I was like, what the fuck? So, Brendan, can you tell us about the Burda Club?
Big Burda.
No, because it doesn't exist.
Yeah,
it is not referenced everywhere. I have like 10 books that I looked through. I could not find a single thing. I went through, of those 10, 3 Irish dictionaries, 1 Scottish Gaelic dictionary, and the closest thing I could find to Burda was a 1977 Irish dictionary saying that Burdan meant tiny person.
Tiny club.
Fuck this weapon.
Yeah.
It is entirely fabricated just to make the Celt look as primitive as possible.
That's interesting.
I don't know,
that's why they included it.
Or it's just for Francis. They made it just for him.
Well, it's like they had this big awesome weapon, and Jeff's like, listen, let the big man swing a stick.
Because Shino mentioned in his email that in one sentence, the Burda doesn't exist. And it's interesting that you found that too.
Like closest thing, like the tiniest scrap that I found was a tradition that the medieval Irish had of carrying like it's called a shield stone. You carried a stone in your shield, and before you engage in combat, you toss it. That is literally the closest thing that I have to this.
It's a bit of a stretch.
It is an incredible stretch, but that is the closest thing I could find.
I do think it has a lot to do with the narrative, like that this is a simple weapon for a warrior they describe multiple times as a barbarian. Problematic much. It's canceled Deadliest Warrior. A warrior they describe as a barbarian versus this what you could call a sophisticated like mechanized warfare, chariot scythe. And I do think the Burda is just included to make the Celt look like more of a caveman and an oaf.
It's not even a good club.
No, it's so little.
You'd want to have a longer club to get better leverage.
Right. Just like a baseball bat sized thing to like.
These Celts, they were artists. Every single weapon that they made was unique to the person who would have it. Mm-hmm. Well, usually for like swords, because rich people would have those.
Yeah,
but. Yeah, if you made like a mace or something, like you would want to have it bigger and somewhat more complex.
If anybody knows the Burda Club's origins, leave it in the comments. Let us know. But So for the test, Max intros the test by saying, "Welcome to Sleepy Hollow." And the show does a really funny edit with a horror music sting because it's like 13 heads like hanging from the ceiling. And all it is it's like a blood bag with like a mask over it.
It's just like plastic, like plaster head or something.
and Francis just smashes head after head with the Berta. It's hilarious to watch. Like, it's really funny. And the crew seems to be having so much fun. Like, Max comes out and he's cheering. And at the end of the test, he goes, Artisher is like trying to repress a smile, and he's like, it's a stick. And Max goes, as far as the sim's concerned, it's an apocalypse you can hold in your hand. Keep that in mind when we get to the results chapter.
I also, there you go. That was like, Max, you were what, like 20 feet away? You got blood on your face. And he goes, oh no.
He's like, oh no. So then we get to the chariot sigh, which is listed as 35 inches, 8 pounds, iron blades, and multi-edged. Lucas, can you tell us a little bit about the chariot sigh?
What a strange matchup. So were these used in the correct time frame is what I was curious about, because everyone's seen these before. They're real. The Greek general Xenophon was an eyewitness at the Battle of Kunzana in 401 BC. He told a tale of thin scythe extended at an angle from the axles and under the driver's seat of Persian chariots.
I wouldn't be shocked if that's where they get the idea for this, probably.
It was probably that tale.
If not from a movie,
Yeah. So if anyone was wondering, this battle was fought between the Persian king Artaxerxes II and his brother Cyrus the Younger for control of the throne. Other accounts,
I know who I'm voting for.
Other accounts say they're introduced around 467 BC. For the sake of the show, dates don't matter. It's close enough. The Scythe Chariot was pulled by a team of 4 horses and manned by a crew of up to 3 men, 1 driver, 2 warriors. And the chariots would plow through infantry lines, cutting down combatants and opening gaps in the line that could be exploited. And I tried looking up.
Practically, were they that good?
No,
though?
That's what I'm getting at. Surprised, like throughout history, like they were applied, and there was a battle or two where they were significant. But for the most part, they were pretty ineffective.
Yeah.
People would literally, to sound like a Deadliest Warrior expert, this was like from a historical account, people would just move out of the way and then go back to where the chariot came through.
That was my biggest thought when I saw this weapon, was like, isn't this a one-on-one fight? Like between like, I don't see how, because it does okay in the results, which is questionable whether they just made that up or not. But for how it's portrayed, like, it doesn't seem like a very effective tool for a one-on-one combat. Like, maybe it would be good at taking out the Celt's chariot or horses, but like, couldn't you just jump over it or move to the side?
Oh, don't worry, I played devil's advocate on this one.
Okay. Brendan, before we get into the test, can you tell us maybe, like, did Celts have like a chariot-based weapon like this, or
there's very loose literary and very even more loose archaeological evidence that it may have been used once or twice, but once again, it's up in the air, and the practicality of a chariot scythe is not how the Celts would use it. They would very heavily intermingle their chariots with their cavalry, and they would work as a trimarchisia, or like a 3-man squadron.
Yeah, it makes more sense for a warrior like the Persian Immortal, because you're picturing like big open desert, maybe like areas that's not heavily wooded, versus the Celts are fighting in the woods of like Europe. So I just get constantly, you're trying to steer your chariot and it's constantly just getting caught on shit, and you're like, God damn it.
Essentially, when they would deploy these two, it wasn't just like one off charging a line. It would be like a line of these chariots all moving forward too, to kind of create this like meat grinder effect.
I'm picturing it being effective like on a battlefield, like,
it really was.
It might not have been, but like the concept to me comes off as like, oh, if you're on a chariot, you can take out like a horse or something, or you can just run it through a line of guys, and it's the human-sized blender, as Jeff calls it. But in a one-on-one fight, I just, obviously if a guy's tired or injured, you can get him with anything. But like, as long as the Celt is alert, I don't know how you hit him with that fucking thing.
He would have to be armless and blind and legless.
So Jeff asks the Celt team before they even test it, he's like, how would you counter a chariot scythe? And Spencer, I noticed, responds with like a bit of a misnomer. He goes, we have no rules of engagement.
Cool.
Which rules of engagement are not the same thing as tactics. I think he just got that scrambled in his answer on the spot, because I was thinking like, oh, so you kill civilians. Yeah, cool.
They would have to fire first before you could fire back.
It's like, they're not the
Also,
same.
it's like, so you would just basically saying, I don't know.
It comes off like that. Like he says it and you can tell he doesn't have an answer. So he's just like, yo, we wilding out here, dog. You know, you never know what we're going to do.
Can you imagine getting your dick up?
All right. So the chariot test kind of malfunctions. Like the pig carcasses are hanging from wooden stands and the stands like just fall over when the chariot hits them. So it doesn't end up doing a ton of damage to the pigs that are hanging on. Obviously, if we wanted to see the scythe's full potential, like the pig should have been strung at both ends somehow.
That's what I said. Like that's because they're tied and like hung up. It allows them to just kind of like fling off.
But then I thought, like, if you're hitting a target, like it's not tied to the ground. You know what I mean? So
yeah, but
if
the
you
fact
hit a
that it
guy,
got pulled upwards instead of being able to be like run over by it,
yes,
I feel like
that's
is
a
a
good
different of
yeah.
damage that could be done, because I think the distance from the ground is around where like a human body, so if it like ran you over, it would still be like kind of shredding you a little bit.
Either way, the test is pretty underwhelming. Do any of you guys have anything to say about the chariot scythe test?
I kind of like the test. I thought it was funny to see like just the destruction, like the rig failing and the pig like flinging up in the air and shit.
I'm surprised you didn't mention the cows in the background.
Oh yeah, there were little cows running around. They're
Like-
probably on some guy's horse ranch, like for
Yeah.
this thing.
What do you think was going through the minds of those cows? Just like seeing this fucking... Yeah.
What do you think is the equivalent of getting hit by that weapon?
Getting hit by a compact car.
Going 15 miles an hour?
My man here is a compact.
We could just send him down and get the same result.
Yeah.
Where's that test?
Yeah.
It's sort of like being hit by a club.
you think the cows were sitting there and they're like, yo, I got the Persian Immortal all the fucking way.
Getting hit by a compact car at 15 miles an hour. I almost want to test that. Do you think?
Yeah.
I feel like you can take a hit from a car at 15 miles an hour.
You heard it here first, folks. Our next video, we will be hitting Lucas with a car. The edge, Max gives the edge to the Berta club for being a simple weapon. He's like, it's simple, it keeps your options open. I think it's clear that they give the edge to this because like the test is way cooler, like a bunch of heads exploding versus like kind of like the pigs just falling over. This is a weird comparison. I sort of get what they're going for because of the illustration between the two warriors, but it's these two things are so in the different realm of like tools.
Also, if I know that this is kind of a meme, they bring this up on the Aftermath, but environment is super critical for the
chariot scythe.
Yes,
Yeah.
because if you're talking like the desert or like, you know, Syria or whatever,
plains,
flat, then like, yeah. But if there's any hills at all, not even just talking about like the Celts' natural environment, but any hills at all, any wooded stuff, I'd be curious to see how it, well, probably wouldn't run that bad in like with like grass and stuff, but any elevation severely diminishes. Like if the Celts just stayed on a hill, you can't use this really.
Yeah.
So.
Well, here's my argument, surprisingly, for it is in the sim, and as they present it, the Celt is also getting a chariot in this battle. So it's kind of chariot on chariot. To me, this, you could disagree with me, but given a choice between a club or getting spikes on the side of my chariot, since both teams have this chariot and it comes to play in the sim, you see it, I think I would rather have the spikes on the side of my chariot if we're doing like chariot on chariot battle.
Conspiracy though, maybe they were going to do a test with a Celt chariot, but that test fucked up the rig and so they couldn't do it.
I like that's juicy, Craig. I like that.
And like we just give them a sling. We have that one from the IRA episode.
We have 100 slings laying around.
Brendan, Any comment on the edge given here?
No comment on the edge, but I know somebody's probably going to bring this up after I made that bet. On page 214 of Barry Cunliffe's The Ancient Celts, he says that some used bows, slings, or throwing clubs. I looked into this. It's not very convincing that this was the same thing.
Okay.
Just putting that out there.
He was like, "Oh fuck, yeah,
I better make sure."
Yeah, I bookmarked this. I knew. I
guess my take on this is just that it seems like they're too different to compare, and to me, it seems like a scythe is not a great weapon for a duel, except for, I did note, destroying like the Celts chariot maybe. If there is a sim, could this even happen in the sim? Like, is it possible to destroy your enemy's chariot? They don't mention it, so we have to assume it's not a thing. But I don't know. The Berta isn't all that impressive either. Like, it's labeled as a special weapon, and it's like
it's a stick.
It's a stick, yeah.
Like, who would waste metal? On
wrapping the stick. Yeah. Just make a knife.
you could make like a helmet out of the metal that you put in this thing.
Make an axe, put a point on it, or like a cutting edge.
Why it wasn't I know they probably didn't use an axe here just because, it'd be too similar to like a Viking or something, but that would have been like so much better, like 10 times better.
I think along with the painting the narrative, weapon variety is probably one of the biggest things that comes into play, and so they're like, you know what, this is probably a barbarian, just give him a stick just because it'd be cool. So that's something I think
I agree, Craig. They do try to switch it up as much as they can. So let's get into where they didn't switch it up at long range. We have the Persian bow and arrow, which is given a range of 500 yards, which I thought was a bit excessive. Bow,
how much is the dragon of?
Right. Bow 4 feet, arrow 2.5 feet, made of wood, horn, iron, and feathers. My first comment was 500 yards in all caps with 3 exclamation points.
I am going to look up the dragon of, because that's.
I think the Dragonov's is like 1,200 feet or something, but
they gave it
1,200
less
yards
than that once, I think.
So, Lucas, can you tell us about the Persian Immortal Bow, specifically their archery training, and will the Celts have to fight in the shade?
So, what I got for you, this is a composite recurve bow. They say that on the show. When you look this up, I thought my first source was going to be the Wikipedia of Deadliest Warrior again, but I actually found some decent information on this. So, as we've seen before on the show, composite recurve bows are great for horseback archery. So this is commonly where this was used. So it was because you can get much more power out of a smaller design. Now, off of archery.com, I didn't make that up. I found some actual information. The standard size was 1.24 meters or 48.75 inches. Now, what is that? That is 13.5 fists long. Primitive measuring here. The Persian bow is commonly called a kaman. The grip was the size of 1 fist, and it was made from wooden mulberry core reinforced in the belly by a pair of horn strips, which allowed the bow to store more energy, maintaining its size. The back was reinforced by animal sinew, which was glued to the wood parts using glue from fish bladder. The bowstrings would be made from silk with careful measure that there was no knots or kinks for perfect transfer of power. A bow typically took 3 years to make in order to dry all 3 layers of sinew. The Persian arrow was often made of reed wood for its high strength to weight ratio. Vulture feathers were used on the back, and they had 3 distinct arrowheads, one with 4 edges and 3 fingers, a cal arrow for hunting and shooting armor, which is similar to what we see on the show, and a Calradian arrow, which was crescent-shaped for shooting snakes, fruit out of trees, or cutting enemy bowstrings.
When they intro this, I forget which expert it is, but they say that the Persian strategy is, they call it spray and pray, which is a term for a fully automatic gun, not really an arrow. What he's referring to, though, is that they shoot so many arrows into a mass of troops that
when
you
they
don't really need to be accurate.
When they give this range of 500 yards,
they blot out the sun, some might say.
I do think they this bow that they use on the show is very underpowered, as with a lot of the bows. The range of 500 yards might be the max range you can fire this. If you fire this thing at like a perfect 45-degree angle and you did like a max volley.
I guess it's funny to me that they put that because you know, I don't know enough. I didn't research. Maybe there's a bow that can reach out to 500 yards just by shooting it up in the air, but like, this is a one-on-one fight, so that stat is just not relevant at all. Like, there's no way somebody is like hitting one guy is hitting another one guy like 500 yards.
For the sake of the show, he hits like 50 and 100 decently.
He hits one arrow into the 100-yard target. We'll get to that.
I think that bow is definitely underpowered.
Yeah, I have some stuff to say about this.
But the 3 different anchor points that the Persians would use was the eyebrow draw, chest draw, and the mustache draw, which was my favorite. And they used the thumb draw technique.
That's my favorite.
Yeah. We reference a video on the new Sensei channel, who's like an archery channel, and he did a whole video about Deadliest Warrior. We've mentioned it on other episodes. He covers this by saying that he says the draw used in like the reenactments and by Artisher is incorrect, and that the Persians used something similar to a thumb draw, probably was his opinion. Now, he probably knows more than we do.
What's kind of cool is sometimes you get these old bows and stuff like that, and you're just like, it was a bow, they used it. It was really cool to see like a layout. Like they had on archery.com, they had diagrams of this bow, like exact measurements, how they made it. So it was cool to see like a breakdown of a historic bow like this. And like, oh, here's all the draws they used. Here's the holds they used. Here's the arrows, how it was made. It was cool to see like an ancient weapon broke down like this.
Yeah. I think that's pretty interesting considering like the bow was like one of the primary tactics that the Achaemenids use is just, you know, superior firepower kind of.
Yeah, it's cool that there is this much historical record of how this bow was made and operated.
I do like it that when they're setting up for the test, they zoom in on the 50-yard target and you can see arrows just laying around it. I don't even want to judge this test because who knows how many arrows are fired.
Who knows if he's fired a bow, really?
Who knows if he's ever fired a bow before? Who knows if they're not just making him shoot from like 20 feet and then editing it so that it looks like he's shooting from 50 yards? Like, whatever. I don't think we need to spend that much time because this comparison is a tale as old as time with this show. The bow versus the sling. The sling is always the kiss of death and the bow always gets the edge. And it does make sense with what they present.
Don't forget, they put the nastiest looking pigskin on the targets. It's just foul looking.
Yeah. They just tape skin over it. And Dorian's like, that way you're not just shooting a random hay target. You're shooting a random hay target with a piece of flesh stapled to it. That way we know it can penetrate skin. And it's like, it's a fucking bow and arrow.
My final argument, I do think that bow is underpowered that they use on the show.
Probably.
It looks very weak. I mean, he has to like angle that thing to make it like 50 yards.
We have a thing where most of the bows and like even a lot of the black powder weapons, they purposely like underpower on this show to create either for safety reasons or to create suspense.
My theory was because it was going against the sling, they wanted it to be kind of underpowered.
Not as good. Last thing I'll say about the bow test is at the end of it, Francis does like this funny bit because obviously they sink a bunch of arrows into this target and Francis is like, he does a little bit where he's like, oh, you know, that's just a flesh wound, and he takes it out and he's like, if a Celt got hit with this, he'd just take it out and break it over his knee, and he breaks one of the arrows over his knee. And then Spencer, man, just let the joke die.
Bombs.
Spencer like grabs the other end and he's like, yeah, and then he'd use this the arrow end as a toothpick when I'm done eating your babies.
They should have put in like a 30-second like dead pause where everyone just stared at the ground and then cut to the next scene.
One of those fun I forget whose channel does this, but those funny edits where it's just like they just edit pauses. Like someone will say
people looking at each other.
and just people looking around. That'd be so perfect.
I always do love the argument too that my warrior's like inhuman. You shoot me in the heart, I just pull it out and keep going.
Right. Yeah. So we get to the sling, range of 220 yards, length 5 feet. The stone is labeled as 3 inches, and it's braided cord and leather. They introduce this weapon, and Artisher goes, "You're bringing a bunch of rocks and your G-string to combat?"
I'm sorry. Dude, I laughed at that.
I wrote in my lines, I said, "I'm not going to lie to our audience. I lost my shit at this joke."
You're bringing a bunch of rocks and your G-string to combat?
So we get to the test. Spencer, he's hitting the skulls. I did have to double check because Francis is like, "Nice hit, Spencer." "Nice hit, Spencer." He says it twice. And I was like, did we have a Scotty Collins controversy on our hands? But it was a different line. They did not repeat the same audio as far as I could tell. We've seen a lot of slings on this show. Like I said before, it's the kiss of death. It always gets like 1 kill in the sim, and it's never like, this show hates slings.
Me too.
So Ed, I guess before we get to the edge, Brendan, do you have anything to add on the Celtic sling?
Yeah, it was used.
We've talked before about how slings are super underpowered in this show.
Yeah.
Like they had a much larger range. They would be really effective. They always give them like rocks that you buy at the dollar store, like for your kids in this show. Whereas they used a variety of like, I guess, what's the word? Just ammunition for slings.
Yeah, slings were used, but for many nobles or, warrior aristocrats, they wouldn't use such thing that, brought little honor, because what honor would you get by killing somebody and you didn't even know you killed them? Because, slings were used in barrages by large regiments of people. So they're only used by like some of the poorest people, but they're also used in sieges of those oppidum. And one of the archaeological sites of one of these oppidum in Britain found like a huge stockpile of sling stones and bullets. And we even find that in, for example, Castle Dorset is a hill fort. It appears that it was designed to have like these interlapping fields of fire for slingers to continuously pelt anybody who was going to attack this hill fort. So definitely it was part of the culture, but such ranged weapons weren't often used by like a champion or something.
Usually what we find with the sling, I think maybe the exception might be the Aztec Jaguar, but the sling on this show typically is just, they want to give one of the warriors a long range weapon like a bow because it's iconic to the warrior, and they have to give the other guy something. So they're like, hey, the sling is so common, he can have
a G-string.
Yeah, the G-string.
So on the effectiveness, I have 3 sources. One is a Roman author, Vegetius, from the 4th century AD, late Rome, in his book De Re Militarii.
I usually take his readings with a little bit of ranch on the side.
Means on military matters, he says, soldiers, notwithstanding their defensive armor, are often more annoyed by the round stones from the sling than by all the arrows of the enemy. Stones kill without mangling the body, and the contusions is mortal without loss of blood. It is universally known that the ancients employed slingers in all their engagements. There is a greater reason for instructing all troops, without exception, in this exercise, as the sling cannot be reckoned any encumbrance, and is often of the greatest service, especially when they are obliged to engage in stony places, to defend a mountain or an eminence, or to repulse an enemy at the attack of a castle or city. Another interesting one that I found in this book particular,
Conquest of Gaul, Book 5, Chapter 43, Sentence 1. On the 7th day of the attack, a very high wind having sprung up, they began to discharge by their slings hot balls made of burned or hardened clay, with heated javelins upon the huts. New Sensei talks about that in an earlier episode of his, the clay balls.
Mm-hmm. Which, after the Gallic custom, were thatched with straw. These quickly took fire, and the violence of the wind scattered their flames in every part of the camp.
I just imagine like you're charging in and from like 200 fucking yards away, a ball of clay just explodes on your fucking head.
I think it just retained the heat more,
like, but I would have shot you from 500 yards away with my bow.
With your bow, yeah.
Well, imagine, so you see that happen, you look to who fucking tossed it, and it's Francis, and like he's naked, and it's like, Jesus.
You're like, I'm gonna pretend to be dead. I'm gonna fight this guy.
And the last source is Aulus Celsus, who is medical professional at that point in his De Medicina. Book 8 describes how to treat sling bullets embedded in your flesh.
Yikes. Yeah, they definitely underset. I'm not saying, look, the bow has a great argument to be made, in its favor, but the sling gets shit on so badly by this show. Like, they always underpower it, and I've like, just hire a slinger to come on for at least one episode. It's such a get out of jail free card for them. They're like, give this guy a sling and he's gonna lose the matchup anyways. So no warrior that brings a sling wins in Deadliest Warriors.
Did you guys read The Conquest of Saul in chapter 5, paragraph 3, sentence 1? Says slings suck.
I heard he was a fraud.
Yeah. Yep.
No.
Well, I guess the edge, the good doctor, he gives us 3 out of 4 of our edges. Like I said, Dorian is back. Give the edge to the Persian bow for the accuracy and damage. We've seen this bow and arrow versus sling matchup time and again on Deadliest Warrior. The sling is always consistently the kiss of death for your warrior. Either it is the show telling you, like, listen, man, you're like a really good warrior to me, but like, you're not the deadliest warrior. It's you're getting friend zoned by the show. Either the sim doesn't like it or the producers make up the numbers at the end don't like it. Nothing more to say, in my opinion. Just see our previous comments in every other video we talk about it. Anything else from you guys about it? Yeah. We're all so sick of talking about the fucking bow versus the sling. So I guess,
to be fair, I think William is the only person we actually see like use the sling.
Yeah.
Was that used in the
most problematic host, you could say, for stretching problematic to mean criminal? David Lavera uses the sling in the Aztec episode.
He was the pedophile.
Right, yes.
I wonder, they should have had Francis use that thing and he'd spin it. He like takes off through the ceiling like a propeller.
Just have Francis throw the rock as hard as he fucking can.
Imagine if like it misfired, went back to the glass, just goes straight through.
There's just a burning hole in the wall behind where he throws it.
I guess my final comment is that David did not kill Goliath with a bow and arrow, so I rest my case.
I actually read a really interesting article that said like the moral of David versus Goliath wasn't like don't underestimate like people based on their size. It was don't bring a knife to a gunfight.
Yeah, because the sling was so like a superior ranged weapon against like a sword, or whatever the hell Goliath was packing.
But I'm at this point I'm just huffing copium, right?
Yes.
What season would have been David versus Goliath?
Season 5 probably.
X Factor, Divinity, protected by God.
X Factor, big
as shit. Height 36 feet.
Can you imagine? We bring on Goliath expert. And
Francis.
For one of the David experts would be like a rabbi. Let me tell you about the son of David. It's going on, and they're like, all right, Rabbi, get this guy off the show.
Bring out the Goliath expert.
So I think it's time, gentlemen. Do you have anything more to say before we go to the reenactment?
Those of you with a weaker stomach better get out of here now. It's too late.
I was thinking that in my head. I will say a little funny goof. The narrator is talking about the sim, and he says that the sim is made by Slytherin Studios, but the text on the computer screen says Slytherin Strategies.
What is it? We talk about how they switch it around all the time because they don't want to get sued by J.K. Rowling.
Apparently in the AMA, Max says he always mixes it up, but he's not the only one who does it.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's more to the story.
Yeah. If only. Yeah. Never mind. Anyways, go ahead.
Oh boy. Welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen, to the pinnacle of every episode.
Hit your enter keys at
The
home.
Sim. I am your Grand Sim Master, upgraded from just the Sim Master. I'm now the Grand Sim Master. Once again, in charge of recalling the Holy Sim in its retelling. Strap on your armor, boys. Mount up your chariots and... I'm sorry, Brendan. Take your box of tissues. As Max says, this sucker's locked and loaded, so let's fire it up. Now, it's time again. My computer always picks up something stupid I said. I was talking about our friend from Ohio, joking around, and instead of saying born and raised in Ohio, I said inbred and raised in Ohio. So, shout out if you're from Ohio.
Right. Shout out to our Ohio kindred.
So, we open up on some Persians patrolling from their chariot, dressed in their bronze scaled armor. Across the way is a Celtic chariot. And the world's most unfortunate looking Celt draws his Celtic sword. Is that the guy you think is Barry's son?
Yeah, he's like the main guy.
Well, I called him the most unfortunate looking Celt. The most handsome Celt. Both chariots then charge into battle. Both moving at lightning fast speed, those Persian scythes spinning with the force of a small compact car going 15 miles an hour. A shirtless dude on the Celt chariot looks like your drunk uncle. The Persian draws back his bow and fires a shot straight into the Celt's chest. The drunk uncle had one too many Milwaukee's best ice and goes down on his knees before the impact hits of the two chariots.
Can we say that that driver, when he gets hit, does our favorite edited groan, which appears in every fucking reenactment now?
When he mushes the horses too, his whole stomach jiggles.
I saw that.
So the two chariots clash. The Celt's chariot breaks at the wheel, and our boy, I'm gonna call him Heinrich. I called him Ugly Heinrich. Falls off the back. Handsome Heinrich. He springs into action and grabs his spear, which I don't remember the name of now.
Lancea?
He grabs his Lancea. Completely, without fear, he charges the chariot as another shot from the Persian bow just misses. In a blink and you'll miss it moment, you see the spear whiz past the Persian's head as he draws back the bow. Snap back to handsome Heinrich as he does a 180 McTwist over the side. Because he wouldn't just stand there.
He'd have to be armless.
He'd have to be blind and armless and legless. And deaf. He ditches the spear, obviously the less effective weapon, and grabs the sling, the obviously more effective weapon. He does a 360 quick scope to the driver of the chariot, with the sling rendering him conveniently out of the fight.
Is that the one where Disney we watched it a minute ago, he falls?
It dings his helmet,
yeah,
he goes ooh.
It hits the helmet and he's like, bong.
It's like the best stunt fall.
The other Persian, meanwhile, jumped off the back and is ready to engage. The Celt grabs his spear back, and the Persian rushes in, shield completely behind him for some reason, just flailing his short spear. Remember, this Persian is a finely calculated combat machine, and it all has a reason.
A commando, if you will.
Modern day special forces. The Persian drops his spear and gets kicked back. He then draws his axe. The Celt takes some wild stabs at him, but misses. Wait, I thought the spears could only be thrown. That doesn't make any sense. Either way, he catches the Persian off guard and stabs him in the thigh. A thigh the size of Francis's arms. Pretend that joke was smooth. The Celt uses his spear and blocks a strike from the axe, just in time to get kicked and falls over what deserves a bonk sound. Bonk. This is an autocorrect here. The Jews stare each other down. The guys stare.
That's the David versus Goliath episode.
The guys stare each other down one more time as the Celt draws his sword. The Celt Okay, the Celt draws his sword. Then
he got so caught up in that.
Oh shit! Yeah, I know what he's doing.
Legs as big as his arms.
I did. He draws his sword, and then he also draws the club, and he does like the dual akimbo shit here.
Yeah,
I forgot about that. He immediately gets the Persian on the ground, and it looks like this fight is about to be over. Oh wait, but the Persian gets back up. Oh wait, but he's immediately kicked back down, but still defends himself with the axe. Somehow.
I noticed like a jump cut where he hits him with the Berta and he's on the ground, and then it magically like it cuts and he's like back on his feet hitting the Celt.
I called it the magic spin move, where he instantly gets up off the ground and stabs his axe into the Celt's arm. Yeah. It's pretty impressive. The Celt misses a few desperation swing, and the Persian runs over, picks up his spear. Ooh. He buries it into the chest of the Celt, ending this fight, ending this simulation. And the winner is the Spartan, the Persian Immortal.
Parsa. All right. Well, thank you for that grand.
Not the
grand
most
sim
like
master.
funny sim. It's kind of straightforward.
Yeah.
It's a lot of rolling around and.
Yeah, kind of a shite reenactment if we're being honest. Not a whole lot of good memes except for the guy getting hit in the head and going, whoa. So results. The Persian Immortal wins. The bow and arrow gets 180 kills. The spear with the most kills of anything with 247. The chariot scythe, 135. And the Sargeras axe with 127 for a total of 689 kills. The Celt sling gets 1 kill. The Lancea gets 126. The Berta, 14. The Apocalypse you can hold in your hand gets 14.
As far as the sim is concerned.
Gets 14 kills. And the longsword gets 170, being the Celt's most effective weapon, for a total of 311 kills. This is a kill difference of 378. It is the biggest beatdown of Season 2 and the second biggest beatdown of Seasons 1 or 2. But of course, the biggest was Spetsnaz versus IRA, which has a math error in the totals, so who really knows?
And
They were that good.
You can't really count it because it's like not a fair matchup.
Yeah, so it's interesting, like, on one hand, for the sim truthers, for the one sim truther in our comments, obviously the Persian Immortal had something going for it that gave it such a win. On the other hand, it's the people who make these numbers up. They wanted to push a narrative here that like the disciplined warrior beats the savage.
If they fed the armor into the simulation in this one, I feel like that would have been the big difference.
I guess before I turn it over to you guys, I'll say Max gives his remarks saying it's a professional fighter versus a barbarian. Jeff is shocked at the magnitude of the win. And I guess before I give my final thoughts, I'd like to ask you guys, what are some of your thoughts about this results? Why don't we start with Lucas?
Just some things that jump out as pretty crazy to me is the bow and arrow not having that much kills. The chariot side, it's hard to ignore. 135 kills.
Yeah.
From that, it's pretty crazy. Everything else, I don't know. All these results seem pretty crazy because even the Persian spear gets like double that the spear of the Celt gets.
I guess because the Lancea,
but it's
they're
same
treating
weapon.
as only a throwing weapon.
I guess.
Yeah,
so.
it is the same weapon.
Yeah. I mean, like the chariot side, those kills, some of them could have been transferred to the bow. I mean, even if you wipe away that side, I mean, the Persian's still winning at that point. Just the ones that are low to me is just the Lancea and the spear. I think is the Persian spear, like what wins this one essentially, where there could be some dispute where it's almost the same weapon and one gets double the kills.
Yeah, one interesting thing is like I compared this to Viking versus Samurai, and you guys kind of agreed, and that matchup is one of the best episodes of Deadliest Warrior in my opinion, and it ends very close. Like they're creating the narrative that the samurai just edges him out, but it's a very close result. And in this, they make it just such a big a slaughter.
I think the Persian, I could agree with the Persian winning. I don't think it would have been this much of a runaway victory, though. Yeah. I think some of those numbers are a little fudged.
Yeah. Craig?
It's bullshit.
Thank you. Craig, we're going to put the marquee at the bottom and say Craig, Celt descendant. And weapons expert. That's always like the tag. All right, Brendan, why don't you give us your thoughts on the results of this episode?
Right. So, well, do you want to wrap it into your ultimate final thoughts? Because I was going to go over the
I know you're going to go over the aftermath.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Brendan.
You know how we keep going on how maybe Deadliest War does like regiment on regiment, or how that would have been, more interesting or something.
Yeah.
I think if that was the case, then the Immortal would win hands down, because we even have like a historical precedence that at Battle of Telamon, that the Roman javelineers and skirmishers pretty much destroyed a lot of the naked Celts, the Gestate. And if we're assuming that this is a naked Celt, then of course I think like a regiment of archers would destroy that, even with the large shields. But one-on-one, I'm not sure. Like, it all depends upon what distance you're at. Because how many shots can you get off before I'm on top of you?
Mm-hmm.
And
that's always the question. I think we ask that almost every episode. Like, even the modern episodes, it's like, what range is this starting at?
500 yards.
Because if it's starting at 500 yards, the Persians obviously not hitting that much out to there. They determined the effective yards with the hard science on this show that the effective range is like 50 yards. So is it starting from 50 and then the Celts sling is engaging at 20? How do the chariots play into this?
Who's using a chariot? Who's not? Are you both starting on chariots?
Can you kill the enemy's horse? And do they get fall damage from falling off the chariot? Because I think we know the answer to that is no.
Do the drivers count too? The driver is a separate person for each team, technically. And they conveniently kill them in the sim, but does that driver count as another warrior?
Yeah, there's so many... The chaotic nature of this episode creates so many questions for the sim that, something like Viking versus Samurai, it's more believable that they're actually feeding it like into a sim, because it's like, okay, it's one warrior with armor and weapons and then another warrior with armor and weapons, and they're going at it. In this one, it's like there's chariots. Some of them are armored. They have multiple ranged weapons. Like, what the fuck's happening?
The chariot sigh, I like to think it's when you join GTA Online, you spawn and some guy runs you over in his Lamborghini immediately. You have to respawn.
That is how it comes
135 guys spawned and just got run over immediately by some kid with too much bull shark bucks or whatever.
So am I really upset at the outcome? Not really. I could see the Immortals definitely winning in like either regiment, but 1-on-1 it'd be more even, way more even and close than this. And I think this like may be evidence that that's had to have been like a video game kind of like glitchy thing.
Yeah.
Where there's so many.
If the sim's real.
Yeah.
You know
if
what I mean?
it's real, then there must be like too many variables and there's an overflow. I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of wrote the same thing, Brendan. Like, I assumed like the Celt was nerfed for narrative purposes, and I was surprised that it's such a thrashing. I don't know why the producers decided to do that, or if what about the Persian Immortal caught like the sim like so perfectly to give it such a beat.
I think it was mainly just the deficiencies of the Celt, and I think the time period that they put, if they really stuck to that 400 BC time period, like if by 350 or so, the Celts would have chainmail armor. They invented chainmail.
Yeah.
Even in like the little reenactments, they're fighting people with chainmail that they probably made
and invented. And a raging hard-on.
But I don't think even with armor that would help too much, because the Persians have a lot of piercing weapons, and that would go through the chainmail. But it doesn't even seem that the Celts like the shield is factored.
Yeah, I know. It's not even brought up that he throws it to the side. Before we get to the aftermath, the last thing I'll say is, I always like to talk about this show in WWE terms, and I think this episode, the ending feels a little off to me, because to me, the Celt comes off as the more likable, like, face kind of character, and the Persian Immortal, because, like, I don't know, Ardashir is like, he's kind of a dick during this episode. I know he's being, like, made to read lines and stuff like that.
Why did the producers make him sound like that kid who was like, no,
well, I got
a force field that
him and Spencer.
Right. Dude. I'm not attacking Ardashir personally. He is an actor. Like,
he comes off like a tan Ben Shapiro.
If you go on the aftermath, he actually seems like a really well-read and educated person, and he would probably like. Well, pretty much, he even agrees that the sling is underpowered.
I think it's just my personal opinion that the Persian Immortal seemed kind of boring. Like, he had a bow and a spear, and the Celt came off to me as, like, cool. Probably because Francis was using all the weapons, so it's like, Francis, these arms are doing some work. So, Craig, you want to get us into the aftermath a little bit? You and Brendan both watched it this time.
Yeah, so we got a fun one. I actually thoroughly enjoyed watching this, but not for the content of the show.
Did you enjoy paying $2.99 for it?
Yeah, Brendan, how do you watch this? Do you pay the $2.99?
I did.
Brother in the $2.99. Thank you.
Yeah, it's the only aftermath that I actually bought.
Oh, well, I guess.
What is that? What's that flag you put over there, Lucas?
Pirate. Where do they usually hang out in when they're like
Craig,
docked or bay?
What is the horse's name in Elden Ring? It is Piracy Torrent, I think.
Right, yeah, something like that.
Oh, it's a pirate flag. Oh, hey, Bay.
Okay.
Anyway, $2.99 Amazon crowd.
Yeah, some of us are a little less honest. So
you wouldn't download a car, would you?
Yeah.
Would you download it?
Hey, I pay my money every week, just like everyone else.
Okay. So this aftermath takes place live at E3 2010, which was really fun. Yeah. So it's because
I'm about to go pay for it, right?
Yeah. And it's because they're trying to cross promote the Deadliest Warrior game, which they were demoing at the time.
Of course.
So Kyrian is wearing a sleeveless button down, just total Kyrian. Yeah. Now, before I get into, and I'm sure we're running like way over time, but some ads that we see just in the frame are Fear 3, Gran Turismo 5, Final Fantasy 14, which is really interesting considering that game now has like a renaissance and it's like one of the biggest PC games right now. But that was at that E3, it was being advertised. Force Unleashed 2, Toy Story 3, and of course the Deadliest Warrior game. And real quick, I wanted to go over some of the game announcements because this was a crazy fucking E3. So these are some of the highlights of the games that were announced. Spec Ops: The Line, XCOM, Gears 3,
played it.
Fable 3, Halo Reach, The Kinect.
Wow.
Oh man.
The Last Guardian, Twisted Metal,
played it.
Black Ops, Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm 2, Brink, Fallout New Vegas, Dead Rising 2, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Portal 2, Bulletstorm, Dead Space 2, NCAA Football 11, which was like I think the last NCAA game.
14.
Also, really? Oh, also Madden 11, NHL 11, etc. Batman Arkham City and the Old Republic MMO. So a lot of
the MMOs. Really, yeah.
A lot of hard hitting games, and also this was for all my E3 heads in the audience, the year of the legendary Konami press conference, which is like one of the most bizarre, awkward things you can watch. There's a supercut on YouTube. Recommend checking it out.
Check it out.
Rest in peace, E3. As for back to Deadliest Warrior, the panel, it's Kyrian, Jeff, Adashir, and William. The footage is like weirdly censored. At least like there's like a throat cut like as part of the B-roll. It's not censored in the show, but it's censored in the aftermath. So I don't know why that is.
Probably because of the E3 thing, you know.
That, or it was maybe played on cable TV. Just I don't know. As part of like the E3 coverage, because Spike would do E3 stuff. So maybe he was playing on Spike, which is why it was censored. And Jeff compares this matchup to Rajput v Centurion, which I think is an interesting comparison because the Rajput, like I get the Persian and then the Roman comparison, but the Rajput really isn't considered a savage like the.
No, not at all.
A more appropriate is Viking v Samurai, but weirdly they don't talk about season 1 a lot in this season, like in the aftermath. So I don't know, but a commenter jokingly asks why the Celts lost if they charge into battle with a raging heart on. And he says, P.S. weren't 10,000 immortals totally crushed by like 4 Spartans? Which shout out to that commenter.
That's like Lucas leaving that comment.
What was the account? Is it mine?
I considered it. It was one of us, but no.
Like 4.
William says that there was a Celtic tribe who fought naked because they believed they had magical powers. And he also added that they believe not wearing clothes would cut down on risk of infection, which we kind of touched on. Adashir, like Brendan said, seems very knowledgeable and smacks down the Spartan comment. He says that this myth has been fueled by certain movies and says the accounts the movie is based on are Greek and told by Herodotus, who is widely disputed when it comes to numbers. That's his words. No disrespect to Herodotus.
I don't know. I trust Zack Snyder. I trust Zack Snyder.
He doesn't say which movies.
Yeah, right.
Someone asks, in all caps, how many times are we going to see that stupid sling?
Was that also my account?
Was that us? Yeah.
Yeah. And then Jeff says, why wouldn't you use a sling?
Why wouldn't you use a sling in real life? Fair point. Why wouldn't you use a sling on Deadliest Warrior?
Because they hate
you. Lose. We've seen it.
All of the kills are in single digits for the entire series for the sling.
I think the Temet Ladle sling gets like 12 or something like that. It's the only one that gets double digits in it, but it's less than 20.
Yeah.
It's like the Berta Club. And but yes, the rest of them I think gets 2, and then both the Gladiator and the Celt get 1 kill with the sling.
Yeah.
Like insane.
And then Jeff argues, well, there's infinite ammo on the ground. It's like, I guess.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. And then the sling is so sad that even Adashir has to come to its defense. And like Brendan touched on this, but he's like, actually, this looks pretty good. And it's like, man, if your opposition is trying to come and be like,
yeah, right.
The little sling, don't be so hard for it. Like, I thought that was really pathetic on the sling's part. Jeff, he then compares the Celts and Immortals when a commenter points out the discipline versus savage narrative, which is something we talked about. And Jeff says that we've never seen a matchup like this on the show before, which is not true. Viking v Samurai was textbook. Jeff also mentions the long shield size, formation, and footwork similarities of these warriors. You're telling me that the long shield size, formation, and footwork are all in the sim.
Yeah, right.
So, and then a different question, Jeff again talks about how the warriors get neutral terrain, which, again, hill versus not hill, one is going to have the advantage. So I don't know what neutral means.
I do enjoy that, like, when sometimes when they talk about the sim, they try to downplay it, like, well, you know, it's very simple. It's just an adapted video game. And then sometimes when they talk about it, it's like the most advanced military simulation on the planet. It's like, we keep this thing top secret because like it can project who would win a war. Like,
yeah. I agree. There's a lot of mentions of Spartans in reference to the Persian Immortals. And the last thing I'll say, because this is a relatively short aftermath, is that this aftermath and why I enjoyed it is really like a relic of the time. Because you got fucking Deadliest Warrior is the coolest thing ever. 300 just came out. Everyone hates the Persians because they're the enemies in 300, and like the Americans identify with they were the Spartans, and they, for a number of racist reasons.
Storm's coming out.
This is such a relic of right before everything got so fucked up, and I liked watching it.
Epic Games is like, we can make something besides a Gears sequel. It's like, wrong. Go back to Gears.
And then they never made anything of significance ever again.
All right. Well, is that it for the Aftermath, Craig?
Yeah. Besides Fortnite.
Let's get final words. I will have the final word at the end. Let's start with Brendan. What's your final thoughts on the episode?
They did it. They did it.
They did it. Look how they massacred my boy.
He's right there. Look what they did.
Greg?
What is there to say that hasn't been said?
Lucas?
Yeah, the Persian Immortal came out today. Is he the deadliest warrior? Let's check history.
My final word, Edge, Spartan. All right, guys. We'll see you on the next episode.
That is KGB versus CIA.
Yes.
Look forward to that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be a goofy one. Kind of excited. We can talk about the CIA and how they killed... Cut the screen to black. All right, guys. We'll see you on the next episode, guys. Stay deadly.
Stay deadly.
Stay deadly.